The humid Miami evening pressed against the windows of the Dade County Crime Lab as Camilla Restrepo studied the photographs spread across her desk for the 100th time. 5 victims in 3 months, each found in different neighborhoods across South Florida, from the Art Deco streets of South Beach to the suburban quiet of Coral Gables. At 38, Camilla had built her reputation as one of the most intuitive criminal profilers in the state. But this case was testing every skill she'd acquired since leaving her native Colombia 15 years ago. The victims seemed random, different ages, ethnicities, social backgrounds, yet the killer's signature was disturbingly consistent. Each body was positioned with mathematical precision, hands folded at specific angles, personal items arranged in patterns that seemed to whisper meanings just beyond comprehension. Miguel Andrade burst through the lab doors with his characteristic lack of subtlety, his press credentials swinging from his neck like a badge of honor. At 29, he was the Miami Herald's rising star, a second-generation Cuban-American whose hunger for truth was matched only by his talent for being in the wrong place at the right time. "Camilla, you need to see this," he said, slightly out of breath, his laptop already opening. "I've been analyzing the locations where the bodies were found. They're not random." He pulled up a map of Miami-Dade County with red pins marking each crime scene. "Look at the pattern they form." Camilla leaned in, her trained eye immediately catching what Miguel had discovered. The points, when connected, formed a perfect pentagram across the city. "This can't go public, Miguel," Camilla said firmly, her accent barely detectable after years of conscious suppression. "If people see this, we'll have panic, copycats, vigilante groups. Miami's already on edge." Miguel's jaw tightened, that familiar conflict between his journalistic duty and his growing respect for Camilla's judgment playing across his features. They'd been walking this tightrope for 6 weeks now, ever since he'd used his sources to get crime scene photos that helped her identify a crucial pattern, and she'd returned the favor with exclusive insights that kept him ahead of the competition. It was a dangerous dance, professional boundaries blurring with each late-night strategy session. The latest victim, Angela Morrison, had been found that morning in Wynwood, the trendy arts district that had transformed from warehouse wasteland to cultural hub. She was a social worker, 43, married with 2 teenage daughters. Like the others, she had no apparent connection to the previous victims, no reason to be targeted. Yet the killer had chosen her, stalked her, and executed his plan with surgical precision. The only witness, a homeless veteran named Tom who slept in the alley, had seen a figure in dark clothing but couldn't provide more details. "Moved like a ghost," Tom had told the police, his hands shaking from more than just withdrawal, like they weren't really there. Camilla's phone buzzed with a text from her sister in Bogotá. "Mija, please be careful. Saw the news. This reminds me of the bad times." The message triggered memories Camilla had worked hard to compartmentalize. Her father's murder when she was 12, allegedly by paramilitaries but never proven, the reason her mother had fled with her and her sister to Miami. That trauma had driven her into criminology, a desperate attempt to impose order on chaos, to understand the incomprehensible. But this case was awakening old fears, the feeling that violence was not something you solved, but something you survived. That evening, Camilla and Miguel met at Versailles, the iconic Cuban restaurant in Little Havana, ostensibly to discuss the case, but really to maintain some semblance of normalcy. The mirrors lining the walls reflected infinite versions of themselves, a metaphor that wasn't lost on Camilla as she considered the multiple faces of their unknown killer. "What if we're looking at this wrong?" Miguel said between bites of his medianoche sandwich. "What if the pattern isn't about the pentagram, but about something else, something personal?" Camilla had been thinking the same thing. The killer's methodology suggested someone highly intelligent, organized, with possible military or law enforcement training, but the symbolic elements felt emotional, almost desperate, like someone trying to communicate through violence what they couldn't express otherwise. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. While reviewing security footage from the Wynwood scene, Camilla noticed something others had missed, a reflection in a car window, barely visible, of someone watching from a building across the street. Not the killer, but someone who seemed to be documenting the scene before police arrived. She enhanced the image as much as possible and felt her blood run cold. The figure's posture, the way they held their camera, it was familiar. She'd seen it before, at 2 other crime scenes, always in the background, always watching. "Miguel!" she called, her voice tight with discovery and dread. "We might have a witness, or an accomplice." The decision to investigate without immediately informing the police was risky, but Camilla justified it as protecting a potential witness from becoming the next victim. She and Miguel traced the figure through various security cameras, a laborious process that took them deep into the night. The trail led to an apartment building in Aventura, a middle-class neighborhood popular with young professionals and retirees. As they sat in Miguel's car outside the building at 2 a.m., the weight of what they were doing settled on them. "This is insane," Miguel whispered, his usual bravado replaced by genuine fear. "We should call for backup." But Camilla was already seeing patterns within patterns, connections that only made sense if you understood the psychology of trauma, of witnessing, of the terrible burden of knowledge. "No," she said quietly. "Whoever this is, they're as trapped as the victims. We need to understand why." The figure in apartment 4B was named David Chen, a forensic photographer who'd been laid off from the Miami-Dade Police Department 6 months earlier due to budget cuts. When they knocked on his door at dawn, identifying themselves carefully, his face showed not surprise but relief. "I've been waiting for someone to come," he said, his apartment walls covered with photographs and maps, a mirror image of Camilla's own workspace. "I've been tracking him too, the killer. I think I know who it is." The revelation that followed would shake the foundation of everything Camilla thought she knew about the case, about Miami's carefully constructed facade of recovery from its violent past, and about her own ability to separate the hunter from the hunted. David Chen's apartment was a shrine to obsession, every surface covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes in multiple colors of ink. The morning sun, filtering through the blinds, cast prison bar shadows across the walls as he explained his connection to the case. "After I was let go from the department, I couldn't just stop," he said, his hands trembling as he poured coffee for his unexpected guests. "Photography isn't just my job, it's how I process the world. I started following crime scenes on the scanner, documenting them unofficially. That's when I noticed him." David pulled out a folder marked with the date of the first murder. Inside were dozens of photographs, all showing crowds of onlookers at crime scenes, and in each one, circled in red, was the same face, a middle-aged man, unremarkable except for his presence at every single scene. Camilla studied the photographs with professional intensity, while Miguel documented everything on his phone, already composing the story that could define his career. The man in the photos was white, approximately 50 years old, with the kind of forgettable features that would make him invisible in a crowd. But his eyes, even in the grainy enlargements, held something that made Camilla's instincts scream. "He's not just watching," she said slowly, pieces clicking together in her mind. "He's reliving. This is personal for him." David nodded eagerly, pulling out more files. "I ran facial recognition through a database I still have access to. His name is Robert Kellerman, former FBI behavioral analyst, retired 5 years ago after a nervous breakdown. His specialty was serial killers." The revelation hung in the air like Florida humidity, oppressive and inescapable. Miguel was already typing, his journalistic instincts overriding caution. "A former FBI profiler turned serial killer? This is unprecedented." But Camilla was seeing a different picture, one painted in shades of gray rather than black and white. "Or," she said carefully, "someone who got too close to the abyss and couldn't find his way back." She thought of her own nights spent inside the minds of killers, the toll it took, The barriers she'd built to keep their darkness from seeping into her own psyche. How thin was the line between understanding evil and becoming it. They decided to investigate Kellerman before going to the authorities, a decision that would later be scrutinized and criticized but felt necessary in the moment. David had an address in Coconut Grove, one of Miami's oldest neighborhoods, where banyan trees created natural canopies and historic houses stood alongside modern developments. As they drove through the tree-lined streets, Camilla received a call from her captain. "Restrepo, where are you? We have another body." The location he gave her made her blood run cold. It was 3 blocks from where they were heading. "We're close," she said, not technically lying. "I'll be there in 5 minutes." The crime scene was chaos, barely contained by yellow tape. The victim was a man in his 60s, found in his garden among the tropical plants that Coconut Grove was famous for. The positioning was the same as the others, but something was different. There were additional elements, photographs scattered around the body, old FBI badges, commendation letters. Camilla recognized the face even before the responding officer said it. Victim's name is Marcus Webb, retired FBI unit chief. According to neighbors, he lived alone, kept to himself. She exchanged glances with Miguel, both understanding the implications. This wasn't random. The killer was targeting specific people from Kellerman's past. While the crime scene techs processed the scene, Camilla slipped away to call David Chen. "Check if any of the previous victims had connections to the FBI or law enforcement," she instructed. Within an hour, David had answers that reframed everything. The first victim, a psychiatrist, had been an FBI consultant. The second, a teacher, had been married to an agent who died in the line of duty. The third, a contractor, had renovated the FBI field office. They weren't random. They were all connected to a specific case or period in Kellerman's career. The killer wasn't Kellerman. He was hunting people connected to Kellerman's past. The real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Tom, the homeless veteran who'd witnessed the Wynwood murder, sought out Miguel at the Herald offices. "I remembered something," he said, clutching a coffee cup with hands that shook less than before. "The ghost man." He was crying. I could see tears on his face when he walked past the streetlight, and he was talking to himself, saying, I'm so sorry," over and over. This detail, small as it was, shifted Camilla's entire psychological profile. This wasn't a cold, calculating killer enjoying his work. This was someone in profound pain, killing out of perceived necessity rather than pleasure. That evening, Camilla made a decision that violated every protocol she'd been trained to follow. She went to Kellerman's house alone, leaving Miguel a message that if she didn't check in within an hour, he should call the police. The house was a modest ranch style, well maintained, but somehow sad, like it was holding its breath. When Kellerman answered the door, she saw immediately that he wasn't their killer. He was gaunt, haunted, wearing the same expression she'd seen in mirrors during her darkest moments. "Agent Restrepo," he said, though she'd never introduced herself. "I've been expecting you. Please, come in. There's something you need to know about the Carpenter case." The Carpenter case, as Kellerman explained over coffee in his meticulously clean kitchen, had been his white whale. A serial killer who'd murdered 12 people in the early 2000s, never caught, the investigation abandoned when leads dried up. "I never let it go," Kellerman said, his fingers tracing patterns on the table that Camilla recognized as the same positioning the current killer used. "Even after retirement, after my breakdown, I kept working it, and 6 months ago, I found him. Marcus Webb, my old unit chief. He was the carpenter." The room seemed to tilt as Camilla processed this information. The evidence was irrefutable. DNA from old evidence that was never properly tested, photographs he'd kept as trophies, detailed journals. But who would believe me? A washed-up profiler with a history of mental illness, accusing a decorated FBI veteran. The sound of sirens approaching broke the moment. Miguel had called the police after all, unable to wait the full hour. As uniforms surrounded the house, Camilla had a choice to make. She looked at Kellerman. This broken man who'd discovered a truth too terrible to bear alone and made her decision. "Robert Kellerman is not our killer," she announced to the arriving officers, "but he's the key to finding who is." Because now she understood. Someone else had discovered Webb's secret, someone who'd been affected by the carpenter's crimes, and they were executing their own justice, using Kellerman's investigation as a roadmap. The hunter had become the hunted, and somewhere in Miami, a vigilante was preparing to kill again. The interrogation room at Miami-Dade Police Headquarters had seen countless confessions and denials, but rarely had it hosted a conversation as complex as the one unfolding between Camilla Kellerman and Detective James Morrison, the lead investigator who'd been brought in from cold cases. Miguel watched from behind the one-way glass, granted special access in exchange for holding the story until arrests were made. "Let me understand this," Morrison said, his Boston accent sharp with skepticism. "You're saying Marcus Webb, respected FBI unit chief, was a serial killer, and now someone is killing people connected to his cover-up?" Kellerman pulled out a flash drive from his pocket, sliding it across the table with shaking hands. "Everything's on here. Financial records showing payoffs, threatening letters to potential witnesses, even DNA evidence he managed to suppress. The carpenter wasn't just Webb. It was a conspiracy of silence." Camilla had spent the night analyzing Kellerman's data, cross-referencing it with the current victims. The pattern was becoming clear and horrifying. Each person killed had somehow enabled Webb's crimes or helped cover them up, whether knowingly or unknowingly. The psychiatrist had cleared Webb for duty after suspicious behavior reports. The teacher's deceased husband had been Webb's partner, who'd likely suspected but said nothing. The contractor had built secret compartments in Webb's properties. The social worker had dismissed abuse reports from one of Webb's early victims. "Our killer isn't random," Camilla explained to the room. "They're methodical, working from Kellerman's research. Someone who was personally affected by the Carpenter case and only recently learned the truth. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source, David Chen's photography. While reviewing his crowd shots again, he noticed something everyone had missed. In 3 of the 5 crime scenes, the same woman appeared in the background, but unlike Kellerman, who watched openly, she was always partially hidden, using reflections, shadows, or crowds to mask her presence. David enhanced the images using software from his police days, revealing a woman in her 30s with distinctive scarring on her neck, partially hidden by carefully arranged scarves. "I've seen those scars before," Morrison said suddenly, his face paling. "Sarah Carpenter. She was the only survivor of the Carpenter killings. 13 years old when she was attacked, left for dead. She testified that she never saw her attacker's face. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Sarah Carpenter had grown up, gotten therapy, built a life, only to discover through Kellerman's leaked research that her attacker had been the very FBI agent who'd comforted her in the hospital, who'd promised to catch her would-be killer. The betrayal was beyond comprehension. Camilla pulled up Sarah's current information. She worked as a victims' rights advocate, had a psychology degree, lived alone in Kendall. Her background made her uniquely qualified to understand both victim and perpetrator psychology, to plan murders that sent messages only certain people would understand. She wasn't just killing, she was telling a story, leaving a trail for someone like Camilla to follow. The decision to approach Sarah required delicate planning. They couldn't simply arrest her based on circumstantial evidence, and Camilla argued strongly against a traditional takedown. "She's not a typical serial killer," she insisted to Morrison and the assembled task force. "She's a victim seeking justice in the only way she believes is available. If we corner her, she'll either kill herself or force us to kill her. Either way, the truth about Webb and the cover-up dies with her." Morrison was unconvinced until Kellerman spoke up. "Let me go to her. Alone. I'm the one who uncovered the truth. She's been following my research. Maybe she'll talk to me." It was insane, sending an emotionally fragile former agent to confront a serial killer, but Camilla saw the merit in it. While the police prepared contingencies, Camilla worked with Kellerman on approach strategies. She taught him techniques she'd learned not from FBI manuals, but from her childhood in Colombia, where survival often meant understanding the human heart behind the violence. "Don't talk about what she's done," Camilla advised. "Talk about what was done to her. Acknowledge her pain before addressing her actions." Miguel, meanwhile, was documenting everything, understanding that this story was bigger than murder. It was about institutional failure, about justice denied and justice perverted, about the cycles of violence that even moving from Colombia to America couldn't escape. The meeting was arranged through a carefully worded message on a victim support forum that Sarah frequented. Kellerman posted about discovering truth, about an old case, about the burden of knowledge, about understanding why someone might take justice into their own hands. Sarah responded within hours, agreeing to meet at Bayfront Park at sunset, a public enough place to feel safe but isolated enough for a real conversation. Camilla and the tactical team would be nearby but hidden, everyone understanding that this was as much about preventing suicide as preventing murder. As Kellerman prepared to leave, he turned to Camilla. "If she kills me, make sure the truth comes out. All of it. The victims deserve that much." The confrontation at Bayfront Park would later be studied in criminology classes as a masterwork of crisis negotiation. Sarah arrived looking exactly like her photos, professional, composed, scarred but not broken. When she saw Kellerman, her face showed neither surprise nor fear, just a deep exhaustion. "I knew you'd find me eventually," she said, sitting on a bench overlooking Biscayne Bay. "You're the only one who really looked, who really saw." What followed was not a confession, but a conversation between two people destroyed by the same man in different ways. Sarah spoke about the years of nightmares, the therapy that never quite worked because it was built on a lie, the moment she'd read Kellerman's research online and realized her protector had been her attacker. "He didn't plan the first one," Sarah admitted, as the sun set over the bay, painting the sky in shades of violence and beauty. The psychiatrist, Dr. Mills. "I just wanted to confront him, to ask how he could have cleared Webb knowing what he knew. But when he admitted he'd taken money to alter his reports, something in me broke. Or maybe something finally fixed itself." She described each murder not with pride, but with the detached precision of someone recounting necessary medical procedures. They all knew, on some level. They all chose silence over justice, and their silence created more victims. How many people did Webb hurt after me because these people protected him? The arrest, when it came, was almost anticlimactic. Sarah didn't resist, didn't run, simply held out her hands for the cuffs with the same precision she'd used in positioning her victims. As she was led away, she turned to Camilla. "Check Webb's properties again. The contractor built more than hiding spots. There are victims you haven't found yet." It would take weeks to fully explore her claim, but she was right. 3 more bodies were discovered, cold cases suddenly solved, families given closure after years of uncertainty. The investigation revealed a web of corruption that reached into the highest levels of Florida law enforcement. Officers and officials who'd looked the other way for promotion, money, or simply out of misguided loyalty. 6 months after Sarah Carpenter's arrest, Miami was still reverberating from the aftershocks of the case. The trial had become a national sensation, not just for the sensational details, but for the ethical questions it raised about justice, vigilantism, and institutional failure. Camilla Restrepo sat in the courtroom gallery, watching Sarah testify with the same composed precision she'd used in planning her crimes. The prosecutor was trying to paint her as a cold-blooded killer, but the jury's faces showed the complexity of their task. How do you judge someone who killed killers and their enablers? Miguel Andrade was in the press section, his upcoming book about the case already optioned for a Netflix series. though he'd insisted Camilla have final approval on how she was portrayed. The defense's strategy was not to deny Sarah's actions, but to contextualize them within a framework of extreme emotional distress and institutional betrayal. Expert witnesses testified about the psychological impact of discovering that your supposed protector was your attacker, about the re-traumatization of learning that multiple people had enabled your suffering. Dr. Patricia Vance, a renowned trauma specialist, explained to the jury, Sarah Carpenter didn't just discover Webb was the carpenter. She discovered that her entire support system, the foundation of her recovery, was built on lies. That level of betrayal can shatter a person's sense of reality itself. Camilla found herself nodding along, remembering her own feelings when corruption in the Colombian police had led to her father's death, how the institution meant to protect had become the threat. The revelation that changed everything came during the third week of testimony. Sarah's defense attorney, Maria Santos, introduced evidence that had been discovered in Webb's properties, detailed journals where he documented not just his crimes, but his enjoyment in manipulating the investigation, in comforting his victims' families while knowing he was the cause of their pain. One entry, dated the day after Sarah's attack, read, "The girl survived, but knows nothing. Visiting her in the hospital tomorrow to ensure her statement stays vague. The trust in her eyes when I promised to catch her attacker is intoxicating." The courtroom gasped, several jurors visibly shaken. This wasn't just murder and cover-up, it was sadistic psychological torture extended over years. Kellerman testified on the fourth week, his appearance marking his first public statement since the arrest. He spoke about his investigation, his breakdown when he realized the truth, his decision to post his findings online when official channels failed. "I knew someone would act on it," he admitted under cross-examination. "I hoped it would be the justice system, but I wasn't surprised when it wasn't." When asked if he felt responsible for the murders that followed, he was quiet for a long moment before answering. "I feel responsible for not catching Webb sooner. Every day I didn't see the truth was another day victims went without justice and potential victims remained at risk. If that makes me complicit, then yes, I'm complicit." Camilla was called as an expert witness, testifying about the psychological profiles of both Webb and Sarah. Her testimony was clinical, professional, but those who knew her could hear the undercurrent of personal investment. She spoke about the patterns of institutional predators, how they deliberately seek positions of authority and trust, how they build networks of complicity through combination of charm, threat, and strategic compromise. Webb wasn't an anomaly, she stated firmly. He was a symptom of a system that prioritizes reputation over justice, that would rather bury problems than solve them. Sarah Carpenter's crimes were wrong, but they were also predictable. When the system fails this completely, vigilante justice becomes almost inevitable. The verdict, when it came, split the difference in a uniquely American way. Sarah was found guilty of 5 counts of murder, but with mitigating circumstances that would influence sentencing. The judge, acknowledging the unprecedented nature of the case, sentenced her to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years, significantly less than the prosecution had sought. In his statement, Judge Harrison said, "This court cannot condone vigilante justice, no matter how understandable the motivation, but neither can it ignore the catastrophic failures that led us here. Ms. Carpenter will pay for her crimes, but this community must also reckon with why those crimes felt necessary to her." The aftermath rippled through multiple institutions. The FBI launched a comprehensive review of cold cases from Webb's tenure, finding irregularities in dozens of investigations. 3 more former agents were arrested for various levels of complicity. The Miami-Dade Police Department implemented new protocols for investigating crimes potentially involving law enforcement personnel. David Chen was hired as a consultant to develop photographic analysis techniques for crowdsource investigation. His apartment shrine to obsession had become a model for citizen-assisted investigation, though with proper oversight this time. Miguel's book, The Carpenter's Daughter, Justice, Vengeance, and the Thin Blue Line, became an instant bestseller, but he donated half his proceeds to victims' rights organizations at Camilla's suggestion. His relationship with journalism had fundamentally changed. The hungry young reporter chasing headlines had evolved into someone who understood that some stories were about more than careers. They were about human truth. He still worked at the Herald, but had started a non-profit focused on investigating cold cases with potential law enforcement involvement. "Every story has layers," he told journalism students at University of Miami. "Our job isn't just to report what happened, but to understand why it happened and what it means." Camilla found herself at a crossroads. The case had brought her national recognition, offers from federal agencies, book deals, speaking engagements. But it had also forced her to confront her own past in ways she'd avoided for years. She started therapy, finally addressing the trauma of her father's murder, the anger she'd channeled into her career, the fear that had driven her from Colombia only to find different versions of the same violence in America. Dr. Isabel Navarro, her therapist, helped her see that her intuitive understanding of killers came from her intimate knowledge of being violence's survivor. "You don't catch killers despite your trauma," Dr. Navarro observed. "You catch them because of it. The question is whether you can do that work without losing yourself in it." The decision to visit Sarah in prison came after months of deliberation. Camilla needed closure, or perhaps understanding, or maybe just to look in the eyes of someone who'd crossed the line she'd always feared crossing herself. The meeting took place in a sterile room under heavy guard, Sarah in orange jumpsuit, but still maintaining that eerie composure. "I know why you're here," Sarah said, before Camilla could speak. "You want to know how I could do it? How I could become the thing I hated?" Camilla nodded, unable to trust her voice. Sarah continued, "I didn't become him. I became what he feared. Someone who could see through the mask, who could expose the truth. Every person I killed was a revelation, a piece of the real story finally told. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not sorry either. They had chances to choose differently. Their victims never did." As Camilla left the prison, she thought about cycles, of violence, of justice, of trauma and survival. Miami stretched out before her, a city built on swampland, constantly reinventing itself, hiding its depths beneath surface beauty. She'd solved the case, caught the killer, testified at the trial. But the larger mystery, how people became capable of such darkness, how institutions enabled it, how victims became perpetrators, remained unsolved. Perhaps that was the real truth. Some puzzles weren't meant to be solved, but lived with, managed, understood enough to prevent the worst outcomes. Her phone rang. Another case, another killer, another chance to stand between order and chaos. She answered it because that's what she did, what she'd always done, what her father would have wanted her to do. In the end, that was enough reason to continue.